Hey, it's Laura Helen from Books Boost Business. Welcome to another incredible author interview. Today we have something really, really special. This is the year that the US is celebrating 100 years since the women could have the vote. And today we have an incredible lady whose grandma was there. She was there, she helped make this possible. She was part of that big movement back in the day. So she has this incredible book where you literally get to be a fly on the wall and learn and hear about all the stories and all the journey, what it took to get the women the vote. So let me welcome Mila. Woo!
Hi, thanks for having me.
Would you like to tell everyone a bit about yourself and what the book is you've created?
Well, my name's Mila Johansen, and I was partially raised by my grandmother, who was a famous suffragette on the front lines in 1920 when women in America got the right to vote. It was a long battle. Yeah, I know, you celebrate. And she was there at the end, and she worked with Alice Paul and Carrie, Chapman, Catt. Alice Paul and Jessie, my grandmother, Jessie Butler, were the same age. And they were young, they were the youth, and they worked with Carrie Chapman Catt, who was older and had worked with Susan B. Anthony. And Susan B. Anthony had handed Carrie the baton. And the interesting thing is that people don't realize, I would have thought that Alice Paul would have been like the hippie of the time, but she was from a Quaker family, a very wealthy Quaker family, and she attended the London School of Economics and got her PhD, which I thought was amazing. These brilliant, smart women, and they all wore big hats and they dressed nice. And she had a house across from the White House, and she would invite Jessie over to have lunch every day. But first of all, Jessie was raised on a cattle ranch in a kind of a very tough situation with some dangers and tragedies. And her mother died when she was 10. Her little sister had drowned 3 days earlier in the irrigation ditch. So she came from a very tough situation on a cattle ranch. But she had a teacher in Colorado who saw how brilliant she was and got her into Smith College on the East Coast. And that propelled her into the suffrage movement. After she helped put together the Pulitzer School of Journalism, she was key in that with one professor.
Wow. And what is your book?
The book is called From Cowgirl to Congress, and it's a great book because she became a success even though the beginnings of her life weren't great and were tough. She lived past it. So she's an inspiration to all women, you know, that no matter where you are, or who you are, or whatever's happened, you can still go out and do anything. And that's the exciting thing. She gave me that, you know, when she worked with the movement, and then later on she moved to England and she spoke all over London with George Bernard Shaw. And her best friend, she ended up meeting Lady Astor, which I was really surprised that Lady Astor was an American from Virginia. And she became the first woman to sit in Parliament, and she sat there for 28 years. And so I have a lot of letters between the two, and I put some in the book so you can be a fly on the wall and see what Lady Astor was like and what she was thinking. She was a champion for women, children, and laborers. And her best friend was Bernard Shaw and Lawrence of Arabia. There's a lot of letters from in museums from Lady Astor to Lawrence of Arabia. So, and then Jessie met the Queen, the Queen Mary, and had a funny incident with her in a garden party. And then she came back to America and she started speech classes for women. She said, you know, women need to learn to speak. And because she had spoke all over London with George Bernard Shaw because she had a speech ready about prohibition. And he was a teetotaler, and he would always say, alcohol is just like murder. So he loved her to speak with him because she had this speech that corroborated what he thought. He was a teetotaler and a vegetarian, surprisingly enough. So anyway, and then she came back to America and she started these speech classes, and she taught thousands of women to speak. And Eleanor Roosevelt saw what she was doing and offered to open her speech classes. So they spoke several times together on the podium. And then also Eleanor would let the students come and practice in one of the rooms of the White House. So often that happened. And also with Coolidge, the next president after, Coolidge was earlier, but the president after the Roosevelts would let Jessie bring her students into the White House too. So it was an exciting period with women emerging and finally starting to get their voice, which we're still working on, right? Yeah.
She was such a crucial part of this movement, and it was such a huge movement for women. It wasn't something that happened overnight. And like we were discussing off camera, some places got votes much later than the US.
Yes, it's so interesting because USA got the vote in 1920, and I always say anyone getting the vote helps everyone get the vote. And that included everyone who is a citizen. So that included even people of color and anyone. The Native Americans weren't citizens yet. So in 1924, President Coolidge helped them become citizens, and then they got the vote. But often people of color and Native Americans weren't allowed to vote in certain states. So people get that mixed up, but because there was a lot of prejudice, of course, still, as we all know. And so, but what was really interesting is England didn't get the vote till 1928. And the most shocking of all, that I heard on the radio, and I had to stop my car when I heard it, I was so shocked, was that Switzerland didn't get the vote until 1971.
Wow, like 50 years later.
Yeah, and you wouldn't think that. You would think they'd be ahead, right? It was very, very shocking to me. I think Australia got the vote way before the USA. Isn't that right? I think I read that. And I didn't know a lot of this until I started delving into writing this book. I have had my grandmother's archives with me for 30 years, and I've been, taking them from house to house where we move. And suddenly one day I opened them up and looked in, and I saw all these letters from Lady Astor, Carrie Chapman Catt, Bernard Shaw. I thought, oh my gosh, there's a book here. Then I found her memoir. And so I spent a year and a half, and I cut her memoir in half so we could have a little easier reading. I got an okay by my daughter. My daughter said, oh, I love the book. It has lots of pictures. That's 94 pictures, rare pictures that most people haven't ever seen. And it's got short chapters. It was just her style. So I was really happy to have her give me an okay. And so I spent a year and a half, and I put a lot of footnotes in so you can know who everybody was. Very interesting people. And and later in life, she, in her early 90s, she spoke all over Hollywood with Gloria Steinem and Marlo Thomas several times. And she took me along, so I got to meet them. And Jane Fonda came a few times, and I got to meet her. And then I got to work for Jane Fonda at a summer camp she had up in the Santa Barbara Mountains. It was a very interesting summer camp because half the kids were from Hollywood and half were from the Cesar Chavez camps. And it was very interesting because, like the first day I said, I had her daughter and her stepdaughter in the room, and her daughter was down to earth and the stepdaughter was a little more hoity-toity. And I said, okay, everybody, make your beds. And she said, I don't make my bed. I have a maid. I go, honey, there's no maids here, so can you just make your bed? And so I had a great time, and later on Jane Fonda thanked me because she said that girl had kind of bullied her daughter, and I helped stop that and make them be friends. And then they sent the horses from Hollywood. They sent like 13 horses. And they had been like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the two white horses who doubled for each other. And Tom and Jerry, who pulled all the wagons in the cowboy westerns. And we got to ride them. And it was really, really fun. And Jane Fonda was down to earth. She was wonderful. She would come up for the weekends and practice her lines. And she'd send actors up to help me teach drama. But when they taught, of course, I didn't teach. And it was a very interesting camp. So I've had because of Jessie, my grandmother, I've had a lot of experience, and she made me the woman I am today. She made me so confident.
You got to hear all the stories firsthand.
Yes, since I was a toddler, I would spend the night in her house, and then I'd run into her bedroom in the morning and tell me about the three-legged cat again, Granny. We called her Granny, or whatever story. I heard her stories hundreds of times. And for some reason, I had the wherewithal when I was about 20 to go to her house and record her stories for 2 hours a day for 2 weeks.
Wow.
And I have those tapes. We could include them with the book, or I have her voice, she's a great storyteller. I can tell her stories, but not like her. She was fantastic. And I've heard her stories probably 100 times each, except for writing this book. There's a lot of stories I didn't know. Like, I didn't know how she took down the meat packers single-handedly. And if they would have known, they probably would have killed her. She found out they were doing these crooked things, so she wrote all these articles, and pretty soon President Wilson had to look at it, and he changed the law so they couldn't, they couldn't sabotage the farmers who were bringing their cows to market in Kansas. It was very interesting. And I didn't know her stories with the Queen of England, and I had no idea who Lady Astor was. So I learned so much. Do you want me to tell the story about how women finally won the vote that last day?
Yeah, go on.
Oh, that's a good story. Well, I've heard this story a lot. And so it was right near the end. It was 1920. We won the vote on August 18th, which is coming up, which is what the book is about. I may have to read this one passage. And so she had to stay in DC because she was still lobbying to make sure it went through. But down in Tennessee, they were having the last vote. I think it was Nashville. And it was coming down to, they needed 38 states to ratify. They had 37. So everybody went down there. The meat packers went down there, the liquor coalition, all the lobbyists for the big steel companies, and Carrie, Chapman, Catt, and her women went. And they kind of tortured them on the street. I mean, even kids would spit on them, and they just did not want the vote to go through for women. But Carrie and her women were down there. And all of a sudden it came down to, they needed one last vote. And it came down to one young man, Harry Byrne. And he, in the very end, voted for ratification. And no one could believe it. They came up to him, all the men, and thumped him on the back. No, you weren't going to vote for that. And they were so upset. And the newspaper men came out and they said, well, why did you do that? And he said, well, I got a letter from my mother. It's really short, but here's what it says. Dear son, hurrah and vote for suffrage. Don't keep them in doubt. I noticed some of the speeches against. They were bitter. I have been watching to see how you stood, but have not noticed anything yet. Don't forget to be a good boy and help Mrs. Catt get the rat out of ratification. Your mother. And so all the newspaper men were so excited that they rented cars, because they didn't all have cars. And they drove up to her home, which is a little farm up in the hills. She was a very meager farm woman, and she was coming out of her cow barn with 2 pails of milk. And they accosted her. And they said, well, why did you write that? So she sat him down in the kitchen and gave him some milk and something she had baked. And she said, well, in the winter, the winters are very long here in the Tennessee mountains, and we read Shakespeare, and he's always funning with words, so I thought maybe I could be funning with words. And that day, 17 million women won the right to vote in America.
Which is why we have the celebration this year. Ooh.
I know, and it's all of us, it's all of us.
And there's so much that you've shared in the story. Everyone can see behind you, this is one of the 2 cabinets full of all this stuff. Like, this lady was incredible to keep all this stuff.
Yes, she was an archivist, and luckily the family sent me the archives, because I'm an archivist. I love history. I write historical novels. I wrote one about Catherine of Aragon, a side story about an herbalist who saves her. And I just love history. And from Cowgirl to Congress has been my great joy, because I got to be close to my grandmother again. We were so close. When I went to college, we would write 1- and 2-page letters every week, because we missed each other too much. We were true loves.
That is so adorable. What an incredible lady. And like you say, she's in part the reason you are the lady you are today.
Yes, because, you know, when she passed away, all the Now Women, you know, National Organization of Women came up to me. They go, so you're going to march in her place? And I go, no. She already told me I was kind of young and flippant. I'm already emancipated from the work she did. I'm going to go live my life. Well, after I had a child, I became just like her. Now my flag I wave is against pesticide and GMO. And I think she would have taken up that flag too. We're organic farmers and we don't believe in poisoning the earth and poisoning our children and ourselves. So I speak out pretty strongly about that. And I'm careful where I go because, you know, it's kind of a dangerous coalition again, you know, like the meat packers. Anyway, but anyway, I'm just like her. I didn't mean to be, but I am.
And if women could take one thing away from the book, what would you say that is?
That no matter where you come from and no matter what has happened to you, you can be anyone or anything you want to be. Everybody is a powerhouse. Everybody is somebody. Everybody is an inspiration to other people, even if it's small, even if you're opening doors for people, even if you teach somebody something, one thing a day. I mean, whatever it is, just give all you can. And I walk a lot. I walk every day to keep my energy up so I can do that. And I'm kind of a missionary. I've been teaching a children's theater program for 38 years for free, just doing it because I believe in it. And it's been big and it's been wonderful. And I've written a lot of plays that are sitting behind me. And so I think anybody, and I came from a very poor childhood with a single mother, but my grandmother, she raised me up and helped me, thank goodness. And so I came from nothing to being a successful woman. So anybody can. Start now, start today. The best time to start is maybe a year ago or 20 years ago, but the next best time is today. You can be anything. Anybody can. And we'll be so surprised because we'll meet somebody on the street and we'll think, and then we'll go to a concert and they're the concert pianist. We don't know who everybody is. You don't know even who you might become. So just go out there and do it.
I love that. That was such a strong message to end on. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me on this interview today. It's been an absolute pleasure to learn about you and your incredible granny. Wow, what a story. Show people again, from Cowgirl to Congress, go and find this book on Amazon. Support the cause. This is a great book to buy, read, and then pass on to another lady, whether that's your daughter, whether it's family, whether it's a friend. This is something that women need to hear. They need to read. So go and get that book. Enjoy it, read it. Like you said, it's a fly on the wall. It's not a big, long, lengthy read. It's short chapters. It's lots of pictures. It's really gives you that really clear image of what it was like to be there. So thank you so much for spending your time with us today. And thank you everyone for watching and joining us here today.
Thank you.